fellow weirdlings, it's Margot, and today I'm talking about the history of haunted attractions, particularly old-school Halloween haunted houses, and the industrious weirdlings who paved the way for the attractions we enjoy today. So if you're ready to get spooked and spine-tingled, keep watching. Haunted houses exist for one reason and one reason only, to scare the crap out of people. So of course they'd be synonymous with Halloween. But where did the idea begin, and how did they get so popular? It's actually a more interesting story than I would have thought. Scaring people for entertainment was certainly nothing new, long before haunted houses came along. For centuries, people have entertained themselves and each other with spooky stories. But there were some exceptional weirdos along the way who propelled this stuff to cultural prominence. One such weirdo was Madame Tussaud. In 1802, Marie Tussaud introduced a shocked and thoroughly scandalized British public to a grotesque exhibition of wax sculptures of infamous historical figures who'd been decapitated. These included King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and a slew of notorious murderers and criminals. Tussaud's likenesses were frightfully accurate because she'd made them from death masks she created of the many guillotine victims of the French Revolution. She learned this skill from her predecessor, Dr. Philippe Curtius, who ran a similar exhibition in Paris. When Tussaud set up a permanent London exhibition, she eventually dubbed her macabre collection the Chamber of Horrors, a name that stuck to her wax museum to this day. Many believe that with the opening of Madame Tussaud's popular Chamber of Horrors, the commercial haunted house attraction was born. By the turn of the 20th century, others began experimenting with their own versions of the haunted house concept and exploring macabre themes. In Paris, the Grand Guignol Theatre, which existed from 1897 to 1962, was notorious for graphic on-stage depictions of death, dismemberment, and other so-called amoral horror entertainment. Located in a former chapel with an eerie atmosphere, the Grand Guignol's patrons showed up for an experience more than a show. Their weekly macabre shows featured sex, murder, violence, and psychological horror, which often induced fainting and vomiting in the audience. Though this genre seems relatively new, it's actually been fairly popular since Elizabethan theater, which was really a distant forerunner for today's splatter films. The Grand Guignol's director, Max Maury, bragged that he judged each performance by the number of people who passed out from shock in the audience, which averaged to about 2 per evening. He further hyped this up by hiring doctors to attend all performances as a marketing ploy. The Grand Guignol's peak popularity was between World War I and World War II, when its ghoulish shows were frequented by royalty and celebrities in evening attire. When the theater closed in 1962, the management attributed it to the fact that their fabricated horrors had been eclipsed by the actual events of the Holocaust. Its final director, Charles Guignol, said, "Before the war, everyone felt that what was happening on stage was impossible. Now we know that these things and worse are possible in reality." The Grand Guignol's shocking scare tactics still have a remarkable impact on the horror genre today. In fact, the term Grand Guignol is often used as a general term for graphic and gruesome horror entertainment. Another important predecessor to today's haunted attractions are known as dark rides, which are still very prevalent in modern theme parks, though vastly more technologically advanced than their 19th century ancestors. Dark rides emerged in the 1800s, with slow-moving boats that would travel through themed caves or grottos, with vignettes and soundtracks to set a mood. The concept was to immerse visitors into a controlled environment and transport them to another place and/or time. Not all early dark rides were meant to be scary, but some of them, such as ghost rides and haunted trains, certainly were. The first dark ride in an amusement park, and believed to be the first dark ride in the world, is called the Old Mill Ride, also known as the Tunnel of Love, created by Paul Boynton for Sea Lion Park in Coney Island, New York in 1835. That one wasn't particularly scary, though it did eventually have a steep drop at the end that caught riders off guard. Over time, the dark ride format evolved from slow-moving boat rides through watery caves to include electric-powered train cars, log flumes, canals, and gravity rides, and incorporated the scenic elements they've since become known for. One particularly cool dark ride concept was Coney Island's popular Hell Gate, one of the most notorious installations of a scenic boat ride, which opened in 1905. Anyone entering Coney Island's Dreamland Park would have to have noticed the large building topped by Satan himself looming over them. Entering beneath Satan's open wings, guests would find themselves in a large open room where they could watch riders boarding small boats and descending along an ever-narrowing 20-meter whirlpool swirling toward the center. In the July 8, 1905 edition of Harper's Weekly, the rest of the ride is described as, quote, "The pool is merely a spiral trough made of wood and iron, through which the water carries the boats to the center, where the slope suddenly dips and allows them to slip beneath the outer rims of the spiral into the subterranean channel, which follows a tortuous course under the building." There are scenes intended to corroborate the popular conception of the Earth's interior. By the time the spectators above are beginning to wonder what's happened to the boat, the passengers have had a surfeit of subterranean horrors and are shot up through one side of the pool to the surface. End quote. The Christian concept of hell certainly wasn't a common dark ride theme of the time, with most of them focusing more on the idea of travel within the secular world. But part of the reasoning for Hellgate's inception was to take advantage of a particular religious loophole. At the time, New York's parks were only allowed to be open on Sundays if they included religious entertainment, so apparently a boat ride to hell was Dreamland's answer to that limitation. It ran opposite a biblical-themed ride called Creation. After 6 successful years, Hellgate was destroyed in, ironically, a huge inferno in 1911. After 1905, dark rides sort of stagnated, as no new technology was developed over the next 2 decades. But in 1928, owner and CEO of the Pretzel Amusement Ride Company, Leon Cassidy, completely changed the game when he created and patented the first single-rail track electric dark ride. Since then, amusement parks and haunted attractions have often relied on the ever-evolving dark ride concept to create their own unique, immersive experiences. But even before dark rides, there were phantasmagorias. The modern word phantasmagoria is made of 2 Greek words, roughly meaning summoning ghosts or image playing. The basic concept of phantasmagoria actually dates back at least as far as the 1400s, when artwork depicted the projection of images of fearsome creatures from lanterns. In fact, some ancient sightings of gods and spirits are thought to have been created by the use of concave mirrors, camera obscura, or early magic lantern projections. For reference, a camera obscura is a darkened room with a small hole or lens at one side, through which an image is projected onto a wall or table opposite the hole. The first written account of a camera obscura dates back to 400 BC. A magic lantern is a primitive type of image projector that uses pictures on transparent plates, 1 or more lenses, and a light source. By the 16th century, necromantic ceremonies and the conjuring of ghostly apparitions by charlatan magicians and witches was a common scam. More modern phantasmagorias or ghost shows were a form of horror theater that often appeared on traveling fairgrounds, using the technique of the magic lantern to create a spooky supernatural experience inside a dark indoor environment. The lanterns would project images of skeletons, demons, ghosts, or various other horrors onto walls, smoke, or semi-transparent screens, using rear projection to keep the lantern out of sight. Movable projectors were used, allowing the projected image to move and change size on the screen. Many shows also employed the use of spooky decorations, total darkness, auto-suggestive verbal presentation, and sound effects to manipulate their audience. Some shows added sensory stimulation, like smells and electric shocks. Others required fasting, fatigue, or even drugs to ensure spectators would be convinced of what they saw. These methods would often trigger vertigo-like effects and fear, causing spectators to respond pretty strongly, both physically and emotionally. These public shows actually started under the guise of legitimate seances in Germany in the late 1700s and grew in popularity throughout most of Europe in the 19th century. When magicians started to use the magic lantern in their shows in the late 1700s, new special effects were created. This combination of trickery and science was employed by showmen all over Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries and influenced much of the Gothic fiction of the time. Phantasmagoria arrived in the U.S. in May of 1803 at Mount Vernon Garden, New York. The uncertainty and fear bred by America's expanding frontier at the time attributed to the ideal mindset susceptible to be taken in by Phantasmagoria. These shows completely absorbed their audience's attention and were the most popular form of visual entertainment before cinema. Over time, the advent of electricity allowed for safer and more controllable ways of illuminating indoor haunted attractions. By the 1840s, Phantasmagoria's methods were already outdated, though more technologically advanced projectors are still in use in haunted attractions today. Today, the word phantasmagoria is still used to indicate changing successions or combinations of fantastic, bizarre, or imagined imagery, like images seen in a dream. In 1915, an English fairground in Liphook, East Hampshire, opened one of the first ghost houses, which were an early type of commercial horror attraction. The public ate it up. Built as a gift from carnival manager Patrick Collins to his first wife Flora, this attraction, then called the Haunted Cottage, was considered the very first for-profit haunted house as we've come to know them. The Haunted Cottage, which would eventually be known as the Orton and Spooner Ghost House, was about the size of a train car and featured a maze of rocking floors, air blasts from below, and vibrating walls, all powered by a steam engine. But the real novelty was that it all happened in the dark. It was the epitome of steampunk horror. The early years of World War I were undoubtedly stressful, with curfews, food shortages, government censorship, and bombing raids. In a time before a lot of modern medicine existed, just about everything could kill you. People found escapism at carnivals and fairgrounds, and creative businessmen like Patrick Collins really thrived on that need for shock and wonder. Over the last century, Collins' Haunted Cottage changed ownership and locations multiple times, though it pretty much always stayed in operation. But it's currently back where it all began, at the Hollycomb Working Steam Museum in Liphook. The exterior artwork still features its original ghosts, spiders, cobwebs, and skeletons, as well as the biggest monsters of the 1920s and 30s, like Frankenstein's monster and the Phantom of the Opera. And today's horror lovers can share a frightful experience with their World War I counterparts. Haunted houses first became intertwined with Halloween during the Great Depression in the U.S. as a means of distracting mischievous kids whose holiday pranks had escalated to property damage, vandalism, and harassment. In 1933, adults were horrified when hundreds of teenage boys flipped over cars, sawed off telephone poles, and engaged in other acts of vandalism across the country. That year's holiday came to be known as Black Halloween. Halloween haunted houses became fashionable at around the same time trick-or-treating did, as communities searched for ways to keep their young hooligans out of trouble. The only other solution was to ban the holiday, which probably would have resulted in riots at the rate those kids were going. Those first DIY haunted houses were pretty primitive, taking place in the basements or attics of private homes, with families hosting house-to-house parties. Kids could go from basement to basement in their neighborhood, getting spooked by different scary scenes. One 1937 party pamphlet described how to design your own trails of terror. It read, "An outside entrance leads to a rendezvous with ghosts and witches in the cellar or attic. Hang old fur and strips of raw liver on walls, where one feels his way to dark steps. Weird moans and howls come from dark corners. Damp sponges and hairnets hung from the ceiling touch his face. Doorways are blockaded so that guests must crawl through a long, dark tunnel. At the end, he hears a plaintive meow and sees a black cardboard cat outlined in luminous paint." As simple as these early haunted houses were, they were a hit, and pretty similar to what you might expect to find set up at someone's home on Halloween today, maybe minus the raw liver. The haunted house didn't become the popular attraction it is today, though, until Walt Disney built one. You may have heard of it. Disneyland's Haunted Mansion opened in 1969, nearly 2 decades after Disney approved the project. The attraction was designed in the style of real-life reportedly haunted mansions, the Evergreen House and the Winchester Mystery House, and was an immediate success. It raised the bar on haunted attractions forever, and really seems to be the biggest catalyst for the entire haunt industry. Using a complex series of illusions created by projections of refracted light, the attraction and its realistic special effects were totally revolutionary. In a single day shortly after it opened, Disney's Haunted Mansion saw more than 82,000 people pass through its doors. Within a few years, there were private and non-profit haunted houses all across the country. The United States Junior Chamber, better known as the JCs, garnered a lot of attention for raising money through hosting haunted houses. This fundraiser was successful enough that they published their own how-to guide. In California, Knott's Berry Farm began hosting its own Halloween celebration, the world's first theme park Halloween haunt event, in 1973. It soon expanded to an annual multi-week event known as Knott's Scary Farm that's still popular today. Other large theme parks have followed their lead. Every year from 1967 to 1979, an incredibly affable Halloween fanatic named Bob Burns attracted national media attention for his detailed and realistic recreations of classic and contemporary horror and sci-fi movies at his modest bungalow home in Burbank, California. Burns is an absolute Halloween and haunted attraction legend. A film editor by occupation, he managed to amass an amazing collection of film props and memorabilia, mostly acquired from collectors and film studios, and used them to create increasingly more elaborate haunted house displays every year. His displays ranged from silly to terrifying, from levitating his wife Kathy 4 feet in the air to a transformer in his mad scientist lab interfering with his neighbor's TV reception. Though his Halloween attractions eventually saw nearly 3,000 attendees for every show, some of them camping out all day and night to see his creations, he never charged admission. Burns grew up as a self-professed monster kid, fascinated by creature features and monster makeup, and lived out his childhood dreams to the fullest as an adult. I know a lot of grown-up monster kids watch this channel and can appreciate the man's dedication. After ending his annual Halloween shows in 1979, Burns did 2 more in 1982 and 2002. That last one was attended by large crowds, still as excited as ever to see Mr. Burns' work. Some of those attendees included directors Guillermo del Toro, Frank Darabont, and Rob Zombie. Nobody wanted to miss out on seeing what would potentially be Bob Burns' last Halloween show. Bob Burns still lives in Burbank, still oversees his incredible memorabilia collection, is 87 years old, and will forever be Halloween goals. As the popularity of haunted attractions grew, America's evangelical Christians decided to express their absolute distaste and unwavering opposition toward the concept by creating haunted attractions of their own. One of the first hell houses was introduced by the Reverend Jerry Falwell in Liberty University in 1972. While not the first, Falwell gets all the credit for popularizing them, though they really took off across the country in the 1990s and 2000s, when churches were apparently craving more controversy. Hell houses, or I guess you could say haunted attractions, run by evangelical Christians, and apparently designed to terrify participants into hating everything about themselves and the world around them, with the goal of driving them into the arms of Jesus Christ and their congregation. They basically attempt to traumatize young people into seeking comfort in their religion. Here's a fairly unbiased description since my brain can't seem to formulate one. According to Wikipedia, quote, "A hell house, like a conventional haunted house attraction, is a space set aside for actors to frighten patrons with gruesome exhibits and scenes, presented as a series of short vignettes with a narrated guide. Unlike haunted houses, hell houses focus on real-life situations and the effects of sin or the fate of unrepented sinners in the afterlife. They are most typically operated in the days preceding Halloween." End quote. They've been compared to car crash footage being used in driver's ed to scare teenagers into driving safely, but hell house imagery appears to be far more graphic and disturbing. They're known for literally demonizing AIDS patients, addiction, women's rights, and gay marriage. They've equated online dating to sex trafficking and frequently act out graphic and grotesquely inaccurate scenes of failed abortions. Pretty much if you have either an affliction or something you enjoy or demand basic civil rights, they want you to feel awful about it, and they have some wild imaginations. Other hell houses stay more in their lane and just focus on misinterpreting the 7 deadly sins. Over the years, hell houses have grown increasingly more political. It's a little weird to me that a church would host an event wherein they portray a person shooting another person because of their political beliefs. But then again, that was the same church that recreated the Columbine school shooting 6 months after it happened in 1999. Another hell house that was being held in a public elementary school got shut down by the school system after they planned to recreate the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, along with advertising a recreation of the 2015 Charleston church shooting. Hell houses have the distinction of being the only scary attractions that I'm aware of that employ actual brainwashing techniques and want people to leave genuinely feeling like trash. They make the notoriously sadistic McCamey Manor attraction seem welcoming. Okay, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but they're on about the same level of ick to me. I will give the radical evangelicals one thing. They definitely know how to host an absolutely horrifying haunted house. But then again, organized religion doesn't really work without fear. To be fair, not every evangelical is supportive of hell houses. Many Christians feel such graphic portrayals of violent acts go against their core values, and many Christian leaders have been vocal about that. And certainly not all Christians are evangelicals. And a lot of the Christians I know are really into Halloween and the traditional haunted houses, haunted woods, and haunted hayrides, and just appreciate a fun holiday. Some churches even host fun Halloween events. I don't think I know many people who go to haunted attractions for politics or religion. Moving on. The late 1970s and 80s brought us some of the best horror franchises Hollywood has ever produced, with slasher series like Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th. And these iconic characters have shown up in haunted houses ever since. This changed the landscape of horror and haunted houses exponentially. It also garnered a much higher demand for scary attractions. This is when commercial haunted houses really started to boom. Of course, the larger commercial attractions were easily able to outspend non-profit groups like the JCs, making it very hard for them to compete. And then tragedy struck on May 11, 1984, when a fire at the Haunted Castle attraction, a walk-through dark ride at Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey, trapped and killed 8 teenagers. Six Flags Great Adventure and its parent company Six Flags were indicted for aggravated manslaughter and accused of recklessly causing the deaths by ignoring repeated warnings from the park's own safety consultants to install sprinklers and smoke alarms. The castle lacked a building permit, a certificate of occupancy, fire and smoke detectors, and sprinklers, and the local fire inspector testified that he'd never inspected it in the 5 years it had been at the theme park. A state panel investigating the fire said that the regulatory system had failed at almost every level, and that the haunted castle had been in violation of a dozen state fire codes. The jury found both companies not guilty of criminal charges, but Six Flags paid millions in civil damages to the victims' families. It was later learned that the fire was accidentally set by a 14-year-old boy who'd used a cigarette lighter to find his way down a long, dark corridor, because the strobe light that was supposed to guide him was malfunctioning. He eventually bumped into a foam rubber wall pad, which ignited. This boy has never been publicly identified and was exonerated of any criminal wrongdoing. In the aftermath of that devastating event, haunted attractions shut down and politicians enacted stricter safety regulations. Under these new rules, and with increasing competition, volunteer organizations like the JCs were effectively forced out of business completely. Over the next 2 decades, professional haunted attractions became big business, with an industry worth over $300 million today, with nearly 2,000 haunts in America alone. Today, these attractions go way beyond haunted houses and hayrides, with the frights getting more and more creative and extreme. Now you can enjoy a variety of Halloween events, like zombie runs, escape rooms, zombie pub crawls, ghost hunts, and murder mystery dinners. There's probably something that'll appeal to everyone. Some attractions even seem designed to traumatize. The most extreme of those would probably be the aforementioned McCamey Manor in Tennessee, which requires visitors to basically sign their lives away in a 40-page waiver, and also requires insurance, a minimum age of 21, and a safe word. McCamey Manor has been accused of literal torture and various forms of assault upon their guests. Their tour can take over 8 hours, though the longest anyone's made it without quitting was 6 hours. It's described as a survival horror boot camp experience, and hey, maybe that's your thing. If you can beat the manor, there's a $20,000 prize. People travel there from all over the world to give it their best try. But there are still many haunts all across the U.S. that offer pretty much any level of scare factor you're looking for. And for the love of all things spooky, in the spirit of the magnificent trailblazing weirdos who came before us, let people enjoy what they enjoy with no shame. Whether it's gore or slasher movies, cosplay, jump scares, macabre history, true crime, or Mickey's not-so-scary Halloween. Do whatever makes your weird little heart happy, as long as it's not hurting anybody. And if Halloween is not your thing, go do your thing. Don't worry about anyone else's. And in the same vein, if someone doesn't like to be scared, respect that too. One more friendly reminder. Please be nice to your local haunt workers. I know a lot of them take a literal beating during the Halloween season, when they're just there to entertain. My subscribers would never be hostile toward anyone who's being nice enough to try to startle them in a controlled environment, but still, it's worth saying. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this topic and will come back for more. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and bring your friends, family, COVID pod, cult members, invisible friends, or enemies. And if you have a favorite haunted attraction, recommend them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.